I have a very specific memory of what my father's dining room smelled like the night he threw me out. Roast chicken, fresh bread, a candle that had been burning long enough to start smelling like wax instead of lavender. Everything warm and domestic, and completely at odds with what was happening at the table. I was 22 years old. I was 11 weeks pregnant. And I had made the mistake of believing that the man sitting at the head of that table was, at some fundamental level, my father first and Warren Marsh second. I was wrong. Let me tell you about Warren. He built Marsh Construction Group from one commercial contract in 1994. By the time I was in high school, it employed 60 people and had its name on half a dozen mid-size commercial buildings across New Jersey and lower New York. Warren wore that success like a second skin. It was not arrogance exactly. It was something more total than arrogance. It was the absolute, unquestioned certainty of a man who had never once been held accountable for anything he did not want to be held accountable for. My mother left when I was 9. She did not leave loudly. She just stopped being there one morning, and Warren never explained it, and eventually I stopped asking. I think she understood something about him that took me 14 more years to learn. I grew up trying to earn his approval the way some children earn allowance. Carefully, consistently. With the quiet desperation of someone who has decided that love is a transaction, and they are going to find the right currency eventually. When I was 18, Warren called me into his office on a Saturday morning. He was warm that day, unusually warm. He poured me coffee and told me he wanted to bring me into the business, formally. He said he was making me corporate secretary of Marsh Construction Group. He said it would look exceptional on my college applications. He said it was his way of investing in my future. I was 18. I was flattered. I trusted him. He put a stack of papers in front of me. Sign here, here, and initial there, he said. Just standard corporate filings. I signed. I did not know I was signing personal guarantees on 3 commercial construction loans he had already mentally defaulted on. I did not know he had exhausted his own credit lines and needed a clean name attached to new debt. I did not know that my 18-year-old signature on documents I had not read had just made me financially responsible for obligations I had no knowledge of and no ability to pay. I found out slowly. Over the following 2 years, notices began arriving at my college address. Formal letters from banks I had never heard of, referencing accounts I had never opened, demanding payment on loans I had never taken. I asked Warren about them. He laughed. He told me I was overreacting. He told me these things worked themselves out. He told me to focus on my studies and let him handle the business. I put the letters in a box. I kept every single one. By the time I was 22, the box was nearly full, and I was pregnant. I did not tell Warren immediately. I spent 6 weeks trying to figure out how to say it. Constructing the conversation in my head, imagining his response, hoping for the version where he surprised me. With a man underneath, the performance turned out to be something warmer than what I had always suspected. He found out through his accountant, who had heard it from someone I had confided in at a family event. He called me that evening and told me to come to dinner on Friday. Just the 2 of us. We need to talk. I arrived at 7. The roast chicken was already on the table. He waited until I sat down. He did not ask me how I was feeling. He did not ask about the father. He did not ask if I was scared, or healthy, or if I had a plan. He looked at me across the table with the particular expression of a man doing a calculation, and then he delivered his verdict. "You are a liability to this family name," he said, "and you are out of the will." Then he pointed at the door. I sat with that for a moment, not crying, not arguing. Just sitting with the specific clarity that comes when something you have suspected for a very long time is finally confirmed. I reached under my chair. I had brought the box with me. Not all of it, just the most recent 3 years of notices, bundled neatly, rubber-banded, placed inside a small gift box I had wrapped that afternoon. I set it on his placemat. I did not say anything. I stood up, picked up my coat, and walked out the front door into the snow. The cold hit me immediately. Sharp, clean total. I did not look back. I walked to my car, sat down, put both hands on the steering wheel, and drove. I want to tell you what happened after the door closed. Not the version where I found my strength immediately. Not the version where the cold air felt symbolic and clarifying. The actual version. I drove 40 minutes to a diner I used to go to in college. I ordered coffee. I did not drink and sat in a corner booth until 2 in the morning. The waitress refilled my cup 3 times without being asked. She did not make conversation. I think she could tell I was not in a place that conversation could reach. I was 11 weeks pregnant. I had $3,400 in my checking account. I had a credit report that, unbeknownst to me, had already been quietly destroyed by a man who used my name as a financial instrument and felt no obligation to tell me. The credit report. I found out what it looked like 2 months later, when I was 6 months pregnant and standing in a leasing office in Newark trying to rent a 1-bedroom apartment. The agent had the practiced professional composure of someone delivering bad news she had delivered many times before. She turned her monitor slightly toward me so I could see the screen. The number at the top was not a credit score. It was an indictment, 4 delinquent accounts, 2 collection notices, a judgment from a commercial bank dated 8 months earlier. All of them tied to corporate guarantees I had signed at 18 on a Saturday morning over coffee, believing my father was doing me a favor. The agent told me she could not rent to me. I thanked her. I walked out. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time. Then I drove to the storage unit, where I had been keeping my things since leaving my apartment the previous month, and I pulled out a blanket and I slept in the back seat. I did that for 11 nights. Some nights I talked to my daughter. I did not know yet that she was a daughter, I found out later, but I talked to her anyway. Through the windshield at whatever was visible of the sky between parking garage levels and strip mall rooflines. I told her I was not a failure. I told her the marks on my credit report were not mine. I told her that the man who put them there was going to spend the rest of his life believing he had gotten away with it. And then I told her that he was wrong. I found a landlord on the 12th night who took cash and did not run reports. I moved in with a sleeping bag and a duffel bag and a box of loan notices I had never stopped carrying. I gave birth to my daughter alone in a hospital in March. I named her Nora. She weighed 7 pounds and 2 ounces, and she looked at me from the moment they put her in my arms with the focused attention of someone who had already decided to pay close attention to everything. No one from my family came. I did not call them. The years after Nora were not a montage. They were specific and slow and expensive in ways that had nothing to do with money. I worked a data entry job during the day and took finance courses online at night. I read every book I could find on distressed debt, corporate restructuring, commercial lending law. Not because I had a plan yet. Because the box of loan notices was still sitting in my closet and somewhere in the back of my mind. A very quiet and very patient voice was telling me that understanding the weapon was the first step to using it. I was not rebuilding my life, I understood eventually. I was building something else entirely. I just did not have a name for it yet. VM Capital, Vivian Marsh. The initials were deliberate. A signature I chose myself, on documents I understood completely, for a company that belonged entirely to me. I founded it 6 years after the night I walked out into the snow. 4 employees. A small office in Lower Manhattan with a view of a parking structure and enough square footage to feel serious without feeling presumptuous. We specialized in one thing: distressed commercial debt. We bought bad loans from regional banks that were exhausted by the process of chasing defaulting borrowers, and we turned those acquisitions into recoverable assets. I was good at it because I understood both sides of the equation from the inside. I knew what it felt like to be the name on a defaulted loan. For 2 years before I made a single move, I tracked Marsh Construction Group from a distance. Not obsessively. Clinically. The way you monitor a position you are waiting to enter at the right price. Warren had over-leveraged himself on 3 commercial development projects, in northern New Jersey that had stalled. The debt was sitting on the books of 3 regional banks who were tired of his extensions and his excuses and his charm offensive and his quarterly promises. The banks were not angry. They were exhausted. That is a very specific and very useful distinction in distressed debt work. Angry creditors make noise. Exhausted creditors make deals. I called the vice presidents at all 3 institutions within a 10-day window. I did not identify myself as Warren's daughter. I identified myself as the founder of VM Capital, which was accurate, and as someone who could take a problem off their quarterly reports immediately, which was also accurate. I offered 60 cents on the dollar for the combined notes. All 3 accepted within a week. I now owned $450,000 of Warren Marsh's debt. He had no idea who VM Capital was. I kept it that way deliberately. My lawyer, Marcus, a man I paid extremely well to be the public face of every VM Capital communication, reached out to Warren's legal team through standard channels. VM Capital was offering a restructuring meeting. There was a liquidity injection available. The window was 48 hours. Warren's team responded the same afternoon. Of course they did. He was 3 months from payroll becoming a serious problem. His Mercedes was 1 missed payment from a repossession notice. The development projects were frozen. The banks had stopped returning his calls. And now a firm he had never heard of was offering him a lifeline with a 48-hour clock. He was going to walk into that meeting believing he was the smartest person in the room. He had been walking into rooms believing that his entire life. The night before the meeting, I sat in my apartment after Nora went to bed and opened the box of loan notices one more time. I had kept them through every move, every apartment, every iteration of my life since the night I left them on his placemat. The original set I had given him. A duplicate set I had made for myself before I wrapped the box. I looked at my 18-year-old signature on documents I had not read. Then I looked at the signature I was going to get tomorrow. The one he would read very carefully, the one he would sign anyway. He was walking into a room he thought he owned, I thought. He had built it out of my name. I had spent 7 years buying it back. I arrived at the building 2 hours early. The suite belonged to a shell company I controlled. I had set it up 8 months ago specifically for this purpose. The mahogany conference table, the leather chairs, the framed architectural prints on the wall, all of it chosen to speak the language Warren respected. Money, solidity, importance. On the table, I had placed a laptop with an active webcam. I had told Marcus to tell Warren's team it was for silent partners in Zurich observing the proceedings. There were no partners in Zurich. The feed went to my monitor in the adjacent room. I sat in the dark and I watched him arrive. He walked in the way he had always walked into rooms, like the room had been waiting for him. Like his presence was the point of the gathering. He threw his coat onto a chair without looking for a hook. He checked his phone. He said something to his lawyer about the office being unnecessarily fancy. Behind him walked a man I had not seen in 7 years. Derek, Nora's father. He had aged in the particular way of men who have never been genuinely uncomfortable. Soft around the edges, well-fed. He was carrying Warren's briefcase with the eager compliance of someone who had traded his own judgment for proximity to someone else's authority. He had traded his daughter for a mid-level position in a failing company. I watched him set the briefcase down and pull out a chair, and I felt nothing except a very cold and very complete confirmation of every decision I had made. Warren sat at the head of the table. He did not look at the laptop. To him, technology was a tool for people who needed tools. He was a man who operated on handshakes and instinct and the particular confidence of someone who had never met consequences he could not talk his way out of. Marcus entered without ceremony. He placed the binder on the center of the table. Warren pulled it toward him with the impatience of a man looking for one specific number. He flipped past the legal definitions, past the representations and warranties. He found the disbursement figure on page 4, $450,000. He smiled. Marcus told him the line of credit was contingent on signature. Warren reached into his jacket and produced a fountain pen, uncapped it, positioned it over the signature line, and then his instincts kicked in. He turned back a page. His eyes moved to clause 14. My heart was steady. I had prepared for this moment specifically. I had stress-tested every version of it. But watching it happen in real time, watching the pen hover while his eyes scanned the dense paragraph, I understood what the next 30 seconds would determine. Clause 14 was a confession of judgment. In New York commercial lending, it is entirely legal. By signing it, Warren would not simply be taking a loan. He would be waiving his right to trial. Waiving counsel. Waiving notice. He would be pre-authorizing me to enter immediate judgment against him the moment any default condition was triggered. Default Condition 1. The collateral pledged in the agreement must be in the borrower's possession and lien-free at the time of signing. The collateral Warren had listed, 3 Caterpillar excavators and a crane, had been repossessed by an equipment financing company 14 months earlier. He had pledged assets he did not own. The default was not in 6 months. It was the moment the ink dried. Marcus checked his watch with the bored precision of a man who had done this many times. He told Warren the wire window closed in 4 minutes. He said interest rates had moved that morning, and if they missed the window, the deal would need to be re-underwritten Monday. The terms might change. There was no wire window. I controlled every dollar, but Warren did not know that. Warren knew he had payroll obligations tomorrow. He knew the Merced's payment was 10 days overdue. He knew that Monday meant a weekend of exposure he could not afford. The greed fought the caution. The greed won. He turned the page back. He pressed the pen to the paper. The ink flowed in a large, looping signature. The signature of a man who believed he was still in control. He told Derek to witness. Derek signed below him without reading a word. I stood up. I put on my jacket. I walked to the conference room door and I opened it and I walked in. Warren looked up with the irritation of someone whose meeting has been interrupted. Then he saw my face. The color left him so completely and so fast that it looked less like surprise and more like something being unplugged. I told him to sit down. He sat. I walked to the head of the table. My side of the table. I told him they had been meeting with VM Capital, Vivian Marsh. I asked if they had seriously not checked the LLC filing. I slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were dated photographs from a repossession yard in Newark, taken the previous morning. The excavators and crane Warren had listed as collateral. All of them tagged and cataloged as property of a third-party equipment creditor. I quoted Clause 14. The borrower warrants the collateral is in their possession and lien-free at the time of signing. Default was immediate. I looked at Marcus. He told Warren that the confession of judgment had already been e-filed with the county clerk. Judgment entered. Liens on his bank accounts, his investments, his property. Garnishment proceedings already being served. His cards were dead. His accounts were frozen. The repossession company had been notified about the Merceds. Derek said it was illegal. I told him it was commercial law. And then Warren did something I had anticipated but still felt the weight of. He looked at me across the table and he tried to be my father. His voice changed. The performance dropped. Something underneath its surface that I might have called pain if I had not known him as well as I did. He said we were family. I looked at him for a moment. You were my father when you handed me documents to sign at 18 and told me it was for my resume, I said. You were my father when you pointed at the door and called me a liability. You were my father when I slept in my car for 11 nights 6 months pregnant because your signatures had destroyed my credit. Pause. You were not a father. You were a liability. And I just liquidated you. Derek stood up then. His expression had shifted from shock to something calculated. He reached into his jacket and produced a document. A process server stepped forward from the corner of the room where he had been standing unnoticed. Ex parte custody order. Temporary sole custody of Nora, granted that morning based on an affidavit Warren had signed declaring me mentally unstable. Derek smiled for the first time. He said the deal was simple. Unfreeze Warren's accounts, return the company, and maybe he would drop the custody filing. Maybe. I looked at the custody order. Then I looked at Derek. I asked Marcus about the retainer. Marcus confirmed Derek's custody attorney had been retained that morning for $15,000. I asked Derek which account the retainer check was drawn on. He held up the check. First Citibank. Warren's personal account. I told him that account had been frozen 4 minutes ago. The check would bounce before it cleared. His attorney would not file a single motion. I looked at Derek. You just committed perjury in front of an officer of the court, I said. Marcus is obligated to report it. The smile left his face completely. He looked at Warren. Warren had nothing left to offer him. Derek put the custody papers on the table. He picked up his jacket. He said he was done and walked out without looking back. Warren sat alone at the head of the table. He waited. I think he was waiting for mercy. For some signal that underneath the charcoal suit and the legal machinery there was still the daughter who had spent her childhood trying to earn his approval. I gave him nothing. I told him to leave. He stood slowly. He picked up his coat. He walked to the door and opened it and stopped. He did not turn around. He stood there for a moment. Then he walked out. I stood at the window for a while after the room emptied. The city was gray and cold and entirely indifferent. I felt something I had not expected to feel. Not triumph, not relief. Something quieter than either. Completion. The particular stillness of a long calculation finally resolved. I picked Nora up from her after-school program at 5. She was 7 years old and she had her grandmother's eyes. My mother's eyes. Not Warren's. And she ran across the pickup area with the total physical commitment of a child who has not yet learned to hold anything back. She climbed into the passenger seat, dropped her backpack, and looked at me. You look different, she said. Do I? Like you finished something. I looked at my daughter for a moment. I did, I said. I finished something at work today. She accepted that completely and moved on to telling me about a disagreement she had resolved at recess, using what she described as logic and patience. I listened to the whole story. I asked the right questions. I drove home through traffic that felt, for the first time in a long time, like just traffic. Marsh Construction Group folded within 60 days of the judgment. The assets were liquidated. The remaining contracts were absorbed by competitors. The employees found other positions. Warren's name, which had been on commercial buildings across New Jersey for 30 years, began the slow process of being replaced by other names. Derek filed nothing. His lawyer confirmed withdrawal of all custody proceedings within a week. He sent a single text message to a number I had not changed, which I read once and did not respond to. Warren did not contact me. I did not contact him. That night after Nora was asleep, I opened the closet shelf where I had kept the duplicate box of loan notices for 7 years. Through every apartment, every move, every version of my life since I had made a copy before wrapping the original, I opened it. I looked at my 18-year-old signature on documents I had not understood. Then I took the box to the kitchen sink. I burned every page. It took less time than I expected. I watched the ash settle against the stainless steel, and then I turned on the tap and watched it go. People ask me sometimes what revenge feels like. Whether the conference room gave me what I was looking for. Whether 7 years of building toward one specific moment delivered what 7 years of anticipation had promised. I tell them the truth. I was not looking for revenge. Revenge is emotional. Revenge needs the other person to understand what is happening and why. Revenge is, at its core, a request for acknowledgement, for the satisfaction of watching someone finally comprehend the weight of what they did. I did not need Warren to understand anything. I needed the liability he had attached to my name to be transferred back to his. That is not revenge. That is just accounting. What I built in those 7 years was not a plan to destroy my father. It was a life, a company. A daughter who resolves conflicts at recess using logic and patience and runs across parking lots with her whole body because she has not yet learned to hold anything back. Warren called me a liability. He meant it as a verdict. It turned out to be a description. I was a liability to every version of his plan that depended on my silence. To every comfortable assumption he had made about what I would and would not do. To every calculation that required me to stay small and stay quiet and carry the weight of his choices without complaint. I was exactly that kind of liability, and I was very, very expensive. If you are someone who has had your name used against you, stay building. Stay precise. Stay patient. The math has a way of finding its way home.